very exciting.
Well, yeah, it's wonderful to be involved with such professional and accomplished authors as yourself at such a young
Yeah.
age.
So I see some other wonderful people logging on. Everybody, this is my mother's first time on Zoom. A little applause.
I know.
Hello, everybody. We're going to get started. It's just a little past 2 o'clock. I'm Susan Wands, and I'm going to be interviewing Jessica Knauss on her wonderful book, 7 Noble Knights. So let me first tell you a little bit about Jessica. Jessica was born and raised in Northern California, and she's been quite the world traveler. She's lived in the United States, in England, and in Spain, where she now resides. She has worked as a librarian and as a Spanish teacher, and she's earned a PhD in medieval Spanish literature before entering the publishing world as an editor. She has published fiction, poetry, and nonfiction in numerous venues, and I've posted her websites and all her social media links there in the chat. So here's how we're going to play this today. If you have questions that you'd like to ask Jessica later during the question and answer, please feel free to type them into the chat field. And at the end of our discussion and her book reading, we'll take questions from the audience. So first of all, let's just ask a little bit about Jessica, about how she came to write 7 Noble Knights. So Jessica, how did you end up in Spain, and how did you end up hearing about this incredible legend of the 7 brothers?
Wow. I've always been really interested in Spain ever since I was a little girl. My mom can attest. So yeah, I found the legend of the 7 brothers for the first time when I was studying at university in Cordoba. They did a little guided tour, and there's a street that has something to do with the legend, and sounded very odd, but I remembered that moment years later when I was in graduate school, and my thesis advisor handed me an article that she'd written about the meaning of the bloody cucumber. So, what really attracted me to this story is the most bizarre scene in the story. I write other fiction, which is very, very weird, aside from my historical fiction. So in order to come into historical fiction, it had to be via the weird route.
I see. And how did you end up living in Spain, and where in Spain are you living right now?
I live in a beautiful place called Zamora. It is in the community of Castilla y León. That is actually where the first scene in the book takes place. And that just happens to, I guess it was fate, because I came here on a program to teach English in high schools. And they just assigned me this wonderful place, and I'm just ever so thrilled to be here.
That's fantastic. So what I'll do is I'll just read a little synopsis of what 7 Noble Knights is all about, and then we'll start in with some more specific questions about it. So 7 Noble Knights, Spain, 974. Gonzalo, a brave but hot-headed knight, unwittingly provokes tragedy at his uncle's wedding to a beautiful young noblewoman, Donna Lambria. Is that how you pronounce it, Jessica?
Doña Lambra.
Oh, beautiful Spanish accent. Thank you. Gonzalo contributes to the death of his bride's adored cousin, but the true motives for her marrying into this family are soon revealed. She covets Gonzalo's family's wealth and power and sends the father into enemy territory to be beheaded, unleashing a vengeance that devastates Castile for a generation. A new hero, Madara, is that how you pronounce that, Jessica?
If you can roll the R, it's better, but that's good enough.
let's hear the authentic Spanish pronunciation.
Well, I say Mudara.
Oh, beautiful. Well, he rises out of the ashes of Gonzalo's once great family. He's raised as a warrior in the opulence of the Muslim Cordoba. He must make a grueling journey and change his religion. Then he chooses to take his jeweled sword to the throats of his family's betrayers. But only when he strays from the path set for him does he find his true purpose in life. Wow, that's quite the story. It's like the legend of King Arthur on steroids. So can you tell us a little bit about when you first heard of this legend and how true did you stay to the accepted story of what it is?
Well, that begs the question, what is the accepted story? The, this it's supposed to have taken more than 1,000 years ago, and it's had a lot of time to have a lot of contributors. There are, for example, in medieval times, we had several different poems and ballads written about this. When you get into the Renaissance, there's still 5 or 6 plays extant from the time of Miguel de Cervantes. As we come into the modern era, there are comic books, and there's a movie from the Philippines, the very, very popular legend. And then you kind of turn that back around and you talk about the folkloric elements, such as in Burgos today, there's a tower, and people say, oh, this is the tower that Doña Alhambra leapt to her death from. That's not how it happens in my book, but that's what they say about this tower. There's a church in the region of Lara somewhere that I have not visited yet that has 7 arches. And they say, well, that's because the 7 noble knights came through here. They made those arches when they marched right through. So that kind of thing. I used the earliest witnesses that we have of this, which are 2 medieval histories. One is from the 1270s and was put together by Alfonso X Sabio, my favorite king. And the other is from a chronicle called the Chronicle of 1344. And I stayed very, very true to the story as it exists. But as you might imagine, it's a medieval text. It's a little bit sketchy, right? Readers today expect quite a bit more in the way of character development. So I fleshed out a lot of things. I added characters and that kind of thing. Otherwise, I stayed pretty true to the medieval texts.
So reading the medieval texts, was that in Spanish or was it in another ancient language that is a derivative of Spanish?
Yeah, so these the 13th century history, it was the first history to be written in Spanish. So it's in medieval Spanish.
Fantastic. Now, the opening scene of your book is so fantastic because it takes place during a wedding in the 10th century. Where did you research a wedding in medieval times? And were some of the activities that happened that you placed during this wedding, were those actual activities that they would have done during a wedding?
Right. So, as you might imagine, nobody really knows anymore what weddings were like 1,000 years ago. There's not a lot of evidence in there. Before I started writing the scene, I remembered reading The Wife of Bath in Chaucer. She said, I've had 5 husbands at church door. What does that mean? It actually means that weddings, the wedding ceremony and marriage itself was not a sacrament yet. So that's my first clue. It wouldn't have been a sacrament at the time of 7 Noble Knights either. And therefore, they had to have the ceremony outside of the church door. And that's why I put them there right at the door of the cathedral in Burgos. And then I read some texts by Isidore of Seville, a great writer who died in the year 636, so quite a bit before 7 Noble Knights takes place. And that's where I got to the vows that they actually say. He put those in a betrothal ceremony, but I moved them to the wedding ceremony itself because otherwise I didn't know what to put. There just wasn't enough evidence.
It was also interesting how you have this almost druid-like ceremony of being in a circle and drawing things and herbs. It's very pagan in a way. Was that part of the Catholic ritual at the time?
Right. So I'm going to share my screen because I have a picture to share.
Great.
Oh, host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, let's get this going on.
We can get that up. So the reason I want to share a picture is that part of the ceremony is inspired by something I saw when I was visiting Arcos de la Frontera, very, very far from Burgos, but nevertheless, it really stuck with me, what I saw there, if we can get the picture.
Okay, here we go. I'm trying to. Oh gosh, this should share it now. Yes.
Let's try again.
Okay.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to share. Here we've got a nice little bullfight, which I'll get to later.
Ooh.
And this is what I was referring to. When I was in Arcos de la Frontera, I saw right outside the cathedral this little circle. I'm not sure what the circle is for. It could be just a compass, something directional, right? But it was, seared into my memory, and I remembered it, and I thought, well, this would be a really good place to bring in the pre-Roman religions of Spain, the things that people did not write down in the Middle Ages because they were trying to, promote Catholicism. The legend itself is very secular, so I thought that this was a really good opportunity to bring in the kind of the Celtic lore that I've seen in the north of Spain, and also a little bit of the women's contributions, which, as we all know, don't get written down as much as the men's contributions. So I kind of made it up, is the short answer.
It's nice that that brick, though, looks very much like your book title, that sort of terracotta and the white.
It does. It does. Yeah. And so you also asked about the kinds of activities at the wedding. So in the source text, it says that the inciting incident takes place in the 5th week of the wedding celebrations. These people were seriously partying for a very long time. So what did they do for all those weeks? So we have music, and we have the lancing the scaffold that happens. And I decided to throw in some proto bullfighting based on this picture. This is from a 13th century text called the Cantigas de Santa Maria. And if you read the scene in the book, you can see how I was inspired here. We've got this bull, he's been trapped in a plaza, and everybody's up on like a balcony throwing things at this bull. We've got some darts and some lances, and then this guy here has a lance attached to a rope or a string so that he can throw it and then pull it back up and throw it again. Pretty smart. And he shows up in the book. Definitely thought that was pretty ingenious.
Oh, that's great. So can you give us a little background in terms of this church, how, that's happening here in Spain at the time, and what is happening in terms of the Moors coming in and being so close to them in terms of territory?
Well, that takes us back to the year 711. There was a kingdom of the Visigoths on the Iberian Peninsula in the year 711, and they were having civil wars and basically were in complete decay, very, very weak kingdom. One of the warring factions invited some newly Muslim Berber soldiers to help him. And when the Berbers got there, they said, wow, this place is awesome. We're going to take it for ourselves. So, and they did it in a record amount of time. They took almost the entire peninsula in less than 5 years. So, wow.
And is this considered part of the Ren conquest during the 7 centuries of this conflict?
So the Reconquest are the 781 years after 711, right? The Christians took a very, very long time to take the land back. So I have another photo I can share. This is, let's see. This is the map that's included in the novel. This map was made especially for 7 Noble Knights by an artist, and it shows in the 10th century exactly what territories belong to whom. So we can see all of this was Muslim territory united under the Caliphate of Cordoba. Then we have Barcelona and these areas, part of France at the time, the very important kingdom of Navarra up here in the north, and the very large kingdom of Leon. And this is all that the Christians have been able to reconquer up to the 10th century. And I could talk about this for days. So stop me whenever you want.
Well, that's amazing. I didn't quite realize that there was so much territory that the Muslims had conquered during that time. And this kingdom that these knights belong to in this family in the north of Spain, they've become quite famous over the years in terms of the population knowing who these 7 knights are.
Right. Yeah. So as I mentioned, they've made their way into the folklore. If you talk about the legend of the Siete Infantes de Lara, pretty much everybody, oh yeah, I had to read that in school, for example. Especially in the Burgos area, everybody knows the story. So
it's great how you've developed. Each one of them has such a special skill. There's the one with the hawk. There's the one who plays chess. There's the hot-headed one. Were these traits that were ascribed to each one of these knights, or did you create this for the world that you wrote in your book?
No, the medieval source texts are very close-mouthed about the actual character of the 7 brothers, kind of act as a unit. The only one with a name is Gonzalo, and he's the best one, right? Well, I mean, they all have names, but the only one who actually does anything is Gonzalo. And he's the best at everything, and he's fantastic, even though he's the youngest. So I had some idea about how to build his character, but the other ones, I pretty much had to draw from scratch. And I definitely wanted to make them all very distinct individuals, because for a modern reader, just to have these 7 guys standing around, it would be terribly boring.
Well, I think it's great too that in terms of the scene where they're traveling and their tutor is with them, there's a scene where some symbols show up in terms of hawks and eagles. Was that part of the legend too?
That is part of the legend. Another sense that we get some pre-Christian kind of lore filtering in. Very interesting and exciting.
And the tutor was actually somebody who's mentioned as part of the legend too?
He is, yes. Yes.
So
very important to show that the 7 noble knights have been well educated. It was very important for knights in the era to be smart as well as strong.
Oh, I see. So being educated was part of the round table, as it were, to become upper echelon.
Exactly.
So in this striking scene, when the father of the 7 noble knights goes to the red and white gates, can you explain what these gates are?
So that's Medina Azara is a real place. And it is a place that I have visited. So I'm going to share the screen again. Let's see.
And these are the gates on the cover jacket of your book?
The arches on the cover are from the mosque cathedral in Cordoba, one of my favorite places in the world. Fascinating with its red and white stripes. And here we have what's left of the monumental gates at Medina Azara. These are only 3 of them. You can get a sense of how big they are because there's a man conveniently standing there. There would have been 14 of these arches, so it would have been just massive and impressive. And this is the last of 3 such gates. They would have had different looks to them and everything, but as you keep going through the gates, you would just get more and more terrified, I imagine, as you approach the palace city. So I hope I communicated that effect in the book. And this is basically what Don Gonzalo sees. Medina Azara was razed to the ground only about 50 years after the era of 7 Noble Knights. So it is today an archaeological site, and they have rebuilt parts of it. And it's stunning, even though it's a ruin, as you can see. Here is the what would that be? The reception hall, I guess, is the most restored part that they have. And this is where Al-Mansur sees people and passes judgment on them. And this is where he would be in all his grandeur and instilling fear into the hearts of everyone around him. And it's also strikingly beautiful. So I was really thrilled to be able to put this these scenes in the book. As I said, it's a ruin and everything. The works of, let's see, what's her name? D. Fairchild Ruggles. She did a lot of studies of this area, and those books helped me get a better idea of what it would have really been like to live there.
Well, you certainly did a great job in your book describing it. That's just stunning how you brought it to life.
Thank you very much. Here we have an aerial view so you can see how big it is. And I'll stop now.
Yeah, I think that's one of the real talents of being a historical novelist, is that you actually have the imagination to be in the point of view of someone alive at that time. And you certainly brought a very wonderful culture to life. As the father is going into this enemy territory, was part of the legend that this epic part of the trip was something he actually did with this letter in his pocket that he couldn't read?
Exactly, yeah, it's absolutely in there. Even most of the letter that I have in the book is a translation of what's in the medieval source texts. I filled it out with my knowledge of medieval letters, which is insanely large, but most of it is from the medieval source text, and it's a very folkloric element to the story that must have been added in at some point, right? And it just goes to show, never carry a letter that you don't understand the contents of.
Timely advice even now for email.
Yeah.
But what I also really loved about your book, Jessica, was your depiction of the women. First of all, let's talk about this bride. She's really something. She's a combination of ambition and vengeance. Was she? I see that in some of your postings, she was not depicted like this. So there's two sides to every coin.
Absolutely. The people of Barbadillo seem to say, well, she was Our Lady and we respect her, so let's put this nice statue here. But I'm pretty sure they're the only ones. She is very much the universal enemy of this story. I was completely enamored of her. She was very fun to write. In fact, in the first drafts, I had several chapters from her point of view, but my beta readers thought she was the protagonist. It's like, no, she's the bad guy. So I had to change that. But she is definitely, she oversteps. That's her main sin, is she oversteps. The things that I admire about her, she knows what she wants and she goes after it. She doesn't have any children in the medieval source text. She does things that only men are supposed to do. And those are the exact things that people in the medieval audience would have been saying, wow, what a bad lady. She is really overstepping her role.
It's interesting how ambitious she is. Do you think it's because she's the second wife and she knows she has to produce heirs in order to be part of this family, or was she just naturally overly ambitious?
I like to think that that's just her way of being. I kind of explained in the backstory. I wrote a little prequel story to this at one point, that her parents died when she was very, very young, and she started to administer her own estate. And so she's just used to being in control, used to having things her way.
And what a difference in terms of a point of view from the mother of the seven knights. I mean, what an accomplishment at that time to be able to produce 7 healthy boys.
No kidding, right? In one of the medieval ballads, Doña Lambra actually insults Doña Sancha and tells her she's like a sow giving birth to a litter of pigs. Just to show you how mean Doña Lambra is in the medieval source text. But yeah, quite an accomplished lady in her own right. But she's good. She never oversteps, right? She loves her husband. She produces many heirs, and she only takes on a male role, such as, ensuring that a proper revenge is taken, etc., when there is no other available man to do it. That's when she takes charge. So
I also like the fact that she got on her horse and she went out and she investigated the territory. She wasn't confined to the house. She was actually an active part of this kingdom that they
absolutely, yeah. I wanted to portray her as a very able woman. So when the men aren't there, she can definitely take care of business. Yeah.
Did she have a good relationship with her brother, this brother who started this by bringing this young woman into the family? Were they on good terms at the beginning of this epic?
I like to think that they were. He's the little brother, and she's, taking care of him throughout his life. And so this total 180, what happens in the book, would have been a big surprise to her. Yeah.
But women at that time couldn't own property. It was still pretty much a male inheritance that the kingdoms were based on.
In Spain, we have a lot more women's rights than in the rest of Europe. But again, it's more the woman can own the property if there's no other available man. So that's how it works.
What was the situation with the Catholic Church at that time? Because I was sort of delighted to read that it wasn't this huge institution in their lives. I mean, it seemed like church was important, but it wasn't politically incredibly strong. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's a reflection of how bizarrely secular this legend has come down to us. I kind of added in some religious elements just to make it seem more realistic. Yeah, it would have been a very, very important, very political, all of that stuff, but it just doesn't show up in the legend, so it plays a minor role. And then we have the issue of conversion. We have the hero of the story converting from Islam, and everybody just accepts it. It's completely acceptable. You can switch religions very easily because it's not like an identity like it is today. It's not ethnic. It's not something unchangeable. You can change your religion, no problem. It's pretty amazing.
That's astounding. And this protagonist that develops during the second half of your book, is he as revered as the Seven Noble Knights?
So Mudara is a very interesting character. In the first medieval source text, barely mentions him at all. So I had to rely on much of the action for part 2 on the Chronicle of 1344, which is highly romanticized and interesting. He is quite revered in that text. He has the strength of all 7 of the other brothers, and all of the knowledge and all of the wisdom as well. He's all that. And so that's why he's the ultimate hero, I guess.
There are some amazing battle scenes that you describe, how brutal and how many days they last. It's just excruciating to read how they dug in there. And this was based, on times that they were doing this kind of warfare.
Yes. So the battle scenes were the very hardest for me to write. I did have to do a lot of research and a lot of trying to put myself into situations that I will never be in. It's very, very hard. But yeah, it is all based on warfare tactics of the time and lots and lots of research.
And it was great to see you seeing all these buildings that have these different murals of the 7 Noble Knights on all these buildings in Spain. Are they just in one location, or are they in several places in Spain?
So they're all throughout the region of Lara, in 10 different little towns. So that's why we had so much trouble kind of chasing them down. We've seen 8 of the 10. So when the pandemic is over, I hope to get the other 2.
And is the Mudara, is he mentioned in the murals? Because it looks like it's just the 7 brothers and not the latter protagonist that's on a lot of these buildings.
Yeah, so I think the mural series follows the 13th century text that barely mentions Mudara at all. So there's just the one where he's in silhouette with his mother. There's the one where he looks like Alibaba or something, I don't know, in the comic book version. I didn't really put that on social media because I'm like, well, that's not what Mudara looks like. Come on. And then in the last one, it's a very, very big mural with lots of different scenes on it, just showing the entire second half of the book. And he looks pretty good in those.
Yes, and this parade that they have, are people dressing up like the Seven Noble Knights through the streets, or was that just a general festival they were having?
No, that is a medieval festival in Larda itself. They do celebrate the legend. They have all kinds of cool medieval fun stuff. I have not been able to attend this festival yet, but someday. And the crowning achievement of this festival is a rock opera based on this legend, of all things. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic that it's sort of this King Arthur type legend as we know it in England, that they had the same sort of historical idea in Spain, that this sort of undiscovered royal person comes and avenges their family line. Do you think that people still very much talk about the Seven Noble Knights, or is it something that's basically regulated to history classes in Spain?
Well, we still have people creating a rock opera, for example. There's a comic book that came out recently on the subject. So yeah, people are still creating different versions of this legend, still very interested in it. As far as I know, mine is the first version in English. So I feel like I'm bringing this to the English speaking public. That was the whole point.
And your idea about this is looked at by some possible TV or movie type development resources. Is that right?
So yeah, I entered a contest. And so I made it to the quarterfinals. Woohoo! And they'll be announcing the excuse me. They'll be announcing the semifinals in a couple of days. So fingers crossed.
Well, that's great, Jessica. Even to get that far is quite an accomplishment. That's amazing. So can I just circle back and ask you, what first drew you to this legend? Was it the Seven Brothers, or was it the latter hero that came and avenged it? Was there a part of the legend that appealed to you the most?
Well, as I mentioned, through the bloody cucumber reading legend, the character who most stuck out to me was Doña Alhambra, for sure. She's unforgettable.
And can you talk a little bit about what this cucumber incident was, and did it really happen? I mean, it seems so crazy that it set off such a vicious reaction.
It's an extremely complex incident that scholars are still writing articles about today. So I'm not sure exactly how much I can contribute to that, but this is the kind of thing that did happen in Spain at the time. I was amazed to find out there are laws that regulate if somebody throws a vegetable at you, what the penalty will be. So this kind of thing obviously went on because otherwise there wouldn't be a law about it, right? So and the meaning of it, there's so many meanings attached to this. My thesis advisor was absolutely sure that it had no sexual connotations at all, but come on. Come on. But the main connotation that is so very upsetting is that it's basically a death threat. And Gonzalo, the offended brother, has been symbolically wounded because there is now blood on his clothes, and he's looking at it from the point of view of honor and what people see, and so he cannot tolerate being so affronted, right? He has to get revenge for this. This is a very, very serious offense.
So they soaked the cucumber in, was it blood or was it beet juice to make it red?
It's blood. Everybody mentions blood. Yep.
So he soaked the cucumber in blood and then threw it at a knight. That just seems like such a foolish thing to do.
It really does, doesn't it? Well, Doña Alhambra has her servant do this because a real revenge is not available to her. Her cousin, the Count of Castile, has said, "Everybody go home. You're all in peace now." But she's really holding on to the grudge, so she has to come up with this symbolic revenge.
In Spain, isn't there also a festival where they all throw tomatoes at each other?
There is. Has nothing to do with the Seven Noble Knights, but it seems like vegetable throwing is a thing here.
I mean, I just loved your description in the wedding scene of, the jousting and, there were all these, athletic events that I had no idea that they did. Was this something that was perpetuated past the 10th and 11th century, or was it just during that time period?
For sure, there was jousting throughout the Middle Ages, and now again today at Renaissance fairs. Definitely a tradition that has survived time. Yep.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, we're right on schedule here, about half an hour in. So I'm going to look at our people. And if anybody would like to ask Jessica a question, I'll unmute you and you can ask her a question about Seven Noble Knights, whether it's her writing or living in Spain as a writer. I do have a real quick question myself. In terms of having a PhD in your studies, did you study this in the United States or England or Spain?
I got my PhD at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. I took a year to research my thesis in Salamanca here in Spain.
And how long have you been living in Spain now?
3.5 years.
Excellent.
I just got my freelancer visa, so I am on the road.
So I'm going to unmute Kristen Gleason. She has a nice question for you. Let's see here. Let's see if we can unmute. She asks, I've asked to unmute her. Let's see. It can be difficult adapting real life historical events and people into a novel with a convincing dramatic storyline with a good climax and resolution. Did you find any particular challenges with this situation in The Seven Noble Knights?
So, as you can tell, the story is the plot is very developed, and it has so many details that we can sit here and pick apart for ages and ages. The main challenge was the fact that Mudarra is supposed to be this great hero who's the great savior of an entire family, and yet there's not much character development. That was my question to myself while I was reading about what he did. It's like, why would he decide to go ahead and do that? These people that he's never met before, and he's saving them. So it wasn't so much to do with the historical research, but it was making the story suitable for today's audience, for sure.
And Kristen, your mic is turned on if you'd like to ask her anything else.
Hi, Kristen.
Well, hi, Jessica. Congratulations. This is really, really interesting. Just kind of a follow-up then. Would you find the storyline just more of a legend, or, did you have trouble picking apart what was sort of historical kind of manipulation, or just things that you felt like they were pasted on to make the story good? Or did the writers really indicate to you that this seemed pretty much what happened? You know how legends can, morph and change over time.
Right.
You said there were storylines, but I wonder, did you try and pick the one that felt most authentic to you? And did you still feel like there were some things pasted on there?
Right. So I did choose to stick with the earliest mentions of this legend, just for that very reason, so there wouldn't be so much froofiness, I don't know, in the ballads with the additions of oh, this person said this and this person did this, and it gets really too complicated, really. And so yeah, I decided to stick with the medieval source texts, and because the legend is so realistic, in the 19th century, for example, and through most of the 20th century, actually, a lot of people were thinking this really happened. But nowadays, scholars are more like, well, it actually does not fit into any historical records that we have. We have Almansor as a real person. The Count of Castile was a real person. and the dates just do not match up. They've looked through all of the archives and records and everything, and occasionally they find a name here or there, but they're not in the right place at the right time. They have found a Don Gonzalo in the same document as Diego Gonzalez, that's the oldest brother, and Gonzalo Gonzalez, the youngest brother. And wow, cool. But what you have to remember there is that, excuse me, I'm just not used to talking so much. Is that it was a text from a monastery, and there is a long and glorious tradition of medieval monasteries fabricating documents for different legal reasons. So this is probably that case. They said, oh, hey, we know some characters from history. We're going to put them right in here. And look, it's even got the same kind of lettering as they had in the 10th century. It's authentic, but it's probably not. This probably never happened.
We have a question here about the mother of the protagonist in the end. Is she well known in part of the legend, or was she just a character that once again you so creatively brought to life?
So Mudara's mother?
Yes.
Yeah, Zaida. I gave her the name Zaida. She doesn't even have a name in the source text. Oh, so sad.
Well,
so yeah.
We have a question here from Richard Gray. I'm going to unmute him. He wants to know, were there elements in the original legends that didn't fit with your narrative and you didn't feel were authentic, so you discarded them?
So keeping to the medieval histories, I didn't really run into that problem so much. It's when you get into the later medieval texts that you find more things that don't really fit in with the narrative. So, yeah.
Richard, did you want to ask more questions?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the original stories were fairly thin, so it's more a matter of padding them out rather than discarding the things that didn't fit. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. Do we have any other questions here? I think I'll bring up. Oh, we have another one?
Yeah, I have one for Jessica. Hi, Jessica.
Oh, hi,
Janelle. You mentioned that character development was one of the challenges because of the source materials and kind of the limitations on that. What does your process look like for that? Is that something you're writing your way into developing the characters, or are you doing some sort of kind of creative process before you even sit down to write to try to get to know those characters better?
That's a good question. I started the novel by summarizing the medieval source texts by hand. And then from that summary, I extracted all of the characters, put the names. And because there are so many characters, I put little characteristics of who they were, how they were related to each other. So probably the character development started there. Yeah. And it from there, I definitely wrote into it.
Do you see a sequel happening in terms of what happens with your final protagonist?
Well, there is another lost medieval epic poem that I could fit him into very easily, that I would really love to write the sequel to, using that material. So let's everybody hope I can make enough money off of this to support myself and write full time.
Excellent. And your book was officially published this past week, is that right?
Just yesterday it came out, to great applause.
But I've put some links to buy the books in the chat field, so anybody who would like to buy the book, you can just purchase it through any of these links to Amazon and Circle Publications, or through the bookshop.org. Jessica, it's been such a delight talking with you. Your book is fascinating. I think if you don't know anything about these 7 noble knights, this is such a delightful way to find out about them. And I'm looking forward to many more of your writings. I think you're really gifted, and it was a wonderful read.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you for participating. in this. You can, once again, here's her contact information. I'm going to put up Jessica's social media links so that you can follow her on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, see all these lovely things that she knows in her world. And we hope you stay safe and sane in Spain, Jessica.
I will, and you too.
Great. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.